Every bee serves the hive, not itself. Every role, no matter how small, sustains the whole. Here, former and present journalists gather like bees, drawn to what's raw, real, and sweet. Each story is a drop of nectar, gathered from the wild fields of experience, spun into something golden. From the sting of truth to the sweetness of healing, this is where we build the hive. Bees don't question their purpose, they simply build. They gather light from the broken things, turn it to sweetness, and leave the world better than they found it. We do the same. One story, one truth, one drop of honey at a time. This is the Honey Pot, where words heal, hearts rebuild, and purpose buzzes loud. The Honey Pot is brought to you by Madrala Law Firm, your legal team for life's unexpected stings, and by TrueCore Wellness, helping you heal from the inside out. Together, they keep our hive strong. Hey, honeys. Thank you for joining us on the Honey Pot. I'm Paulina, your host, and today we are joined with Toi Thornton. Now, Toi and I met back in Louisiana in one of my first TV news markets, and Toi, we started a news station from the ground up. And we were the rookies in Louisiana, in Lafayette, Louisiana. And we had no photographers. We had a camera crew, though, that staged our set, but we had nobody helping us out in the field, really. And so we were as tight as we all could get as MMJs go. I think it was probably I loved that market, honestly. There was a lot of good and bad in it, but I loved the team that we had because I don't know that I ever worked with a team like that again, where we learned from one another. We didn't compete with one another necessarily. We wanted each other to succeed, and we poured into one another. And you ended up leaving from Lafayette and really making a career for yourself that's been phenomenal. So we'll get to all of that. But thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you, Paulina. Wow, we used to sit next to each other.
We did.
I guess we're next to each other so many years ago, and yeah, we started launched the station. We were both very young reporters,
Yeah.
and launched the station. When you said that, I was thinking about campaigns. They talk about campaigns being grassroots campaigns.
Yeah.
How some people really start from the ground up, and we really did. It was like a grassroots effort.
Yeah.
Started that thing from scratch.
I said this on another episode where we walked in and we barely had walls up to even divide the newsroom from the actual set. So when
Yeah.
we talk about like from the ground up, we really built this thing forward. We went through schooling on how to use our equipment. We went through schooling on how to be MMJs. But then before we even launched, I don't know if you remember, we had those live shots that we would do in Baton Rouge.
I forgot about that. We were supposed to be training there, but they needed a few extra reporters, so they were are sending us out to do live shots for them. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, we were. That was a wild experience. I go back to Lafayette with so much heart because I really learned how to do my job out there, how to be an MMJ, how to write stories, how to shoot, how to edit. And a lot of it came from all of us working as a team. It was kind of sitting in those trenches together. It was critiquing each other's work. It was going over stand-ups and saying, like, was this creative enough? Was this not creative enough? And then on top of it, it was really just the support that we had for one another because a lot of us were there by ourselves, and we didn't have family out there.
Yeah, I think that the friendships we gained there will always keep. And I know you and I haven't really talked to each other much, but we of course followed each other on social media and throughout the years. But as soon as you reached out, I was happy to do it because I feel like we still have that same connection
Yeah.
because we went through the same thing, and I'm sure a lot of journalists have that same testament. And then there are my friends Jay Russell and Joe Sam, who were also there, who I'm still extremely close friends with. In fact, we have a group chat on our iMessage. It's called the Fellas, and we constantly keep in touch. Sometimes we travel together when we are able to, of course, and just encouraging each other as we go through life and this as we weave in and out of this career because we've all done it.
Yeah.
And as we continue to progress, into our destiny, whatever that might be.
I don't have a group chat with everybody, but I definitely have my core people who I still call for everything. We still chat with, about just life, and they still pour into me the same way that they did. Life has taken us in different directions, right? It's taken us into different parts of the states and the country. Some of us have stayed in news longer. Some of us left, came back like I did, and then Charlie did. And talk to me about what your goals were, because you were so interesting, Toy. Like, you were so much younger than I was, I feel. And I don't know that or at least in my head, it felt like you were so much younger than me. You were so savvy. Just watching you and how you worked, and just the composure that you kept. I don't know. I was always like blown away by it. I go back to the story that we had, and I don't remember the full story, but I remember you went out and you got the security footage from the house. And I don't know if you remember that, but it was like we were on this, we like blew the competition out of the water on this story because of you, because you went outside the box and you did some door knocks and you ended up getting security footage. I remember we had people who were in the newsroom that we worked with who had family members in other newsrooms, and they were like, oh, people thought that like we cheated. And we're like, how? No, Toy was just brilliant. He just did his job well.
The funny thing about that is I forgot about that, of course. But that day, and boy, did I get points in from the newsroom that day. But I felt like I was just in the right place at the right time. And I didn't think anything of myself. Would get it that I just randomly saw this guy, and I was like, "Hey, did you hear about the thing that happened?" And he was like, "Yeah, I got footage," and I'm like, "Oh, perfect," and typically, Paulina, being out in the field, that's typically how it happens. You
Right.
just come up on the right person at the right time, and that's the way it happens. And it's ironic because I was very young and very new in the business. It was my second job in the business, and in fact, in between that job and my first job, I had gotten out of news for a little while,
Oh, I didn't know
and so I
that.
was getting back in, and I was kind of feeling like I was restarting. And so I did lack a lot of confidence at that time. And I was looking at you like, oh gosh, she's so savvy and so good. And your shooting was extremely good as well. And I'm like, Paulina is a girl and she can lug around all this equipment and do all these amazing shots and stuff. And I wanted to do it too. And so it's funny, that we did have that mutual respect, for each other. And then of course, shortly after, you were moved to the morning shift to begin well, to the evening shift initially to begin anchoring, and
Right.
then to the morning shift. And we were separated, of course. And then once you were moved to the morning shift, I was moved to the evening shift to take that anchor
Right.
job that you had. There was a lot going on there in that that short time. A lot happened. But yeah, I mean, being on the streets of Lafayette, I think it made us,
Hmm.
it shaped me. And people always say it's when you really have to rub nickels together, for the lack of a better saying. Those are the times when you are able to. I guess those are the times that really make you. And so when you get to the bigger markets, and we could talk about Lafayette, as bad as we may want to talk about it, but the experience really made us. And I remember things that I could do in bigger markets, so many other people could not do, and they were wondering, well, how do you do your stories with such ease? Because
Hmm.
my trick was never to give 150%. I was always going to give you 100%. You were going to get what you asked for, but I'm not going above and beyond. And the reason I did that was because, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't do more, but the reason I did not try to overdo it was because I never wanted to burn out.
Mm.
And for that reason, I didn't burn out on the streets out there. And because it will burn you out. You're putting in so much every day, putting in so much, so much, so much work to turn that story. It has to be on at the deadline. And then you get to the next, you get your story on there, whoop de doo. And then you get to the next day and you got to make it all happen again. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Every day you start fresh, which is a good thing and a bad thing. One good thing about starting fresh the next day is if you screw up, you got a new day to start to start fresh. And then the bad thing about it is you've got to prove yourself almost
Right.
over again. And that is one of the most difficult things I think about this business and
Staying
working with.
consistent, right?
Mhm.
It's definitely hard because I think, like you said, we had a lot of challenges in that newsroom, and I can say a lot of bad things about it. But like you said, I go on into the next newsrooms, and like you, I had a lot of success because of the grit that we had to really earn in the field in Lafayette. You know, we didn't have photographers for when we first started. So we were each other's photographers, or they'd be like, do your own live shots, right? Like, so we were setting up our own camera, our own lighting, which most of the time we didn't even have extra lighting. We just had a camera and a microphone. That was it. And then they gave you car keys and said, go out there, do do the story. So it was interesting. Like you said, the right time at the right person at the right time. Even when we go back to that story that I said about you finding that man, the way that I don't think most of us would think if we didn't have those experiences. As a journalist later moving forward, that was the first thing that I would ask people, because especially if I was doing a door knock, right? You'd be like, oh, I remember Toy doing that. And so it made all of us think differently. And we did so because we were able to kind of mesh off of one another. But unlike you, I don't know that I knew how to give less than 150%, because that's what I was taught, right? Like, I grew up in an immigrant household, and working for my mom, if you've ever worked for family, uh, it's it's a little different. You're expected to give 150% because you're kind of like, you have to do better than the next person, like, just like you have to be the example for the next person. And so there was a lot of pressure that I put on myself, and there's a lot of pressure in the industry too as you're moving on up. But I think I'd look at you, and the two things that were always very noticeable to me was, one, how calm you were, and I could never understand like where, because I was like, there's so many things happening, how are you so calm all the time, like, I mean, truly, we're getting yelled at, we're getting new scripts, the story's falling through, our equipment's failing, the wrong videos popping up. So there's always something that was going wrong in that newsroom. And then there's breaking news with like severe weather. So that was just unpredictable as all holy hell. But the other
Yeah, I
thing that
mean,
always,
go
yeah,
ahead, go ahead. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say a couple of things there. Um, I certainly was taught to go above and beyond as well, because of course, you said you grew up in an immigrant household, and like, I was born in grew up in a black household, and my parents gave us no other choice but to
right.
be the best at what we could be, because we were going into a world that would require it, especially being people of color, being as you said, you're coming from an immigrant household where the opportunities are just not
There.
always there for us. Sometimes just because of your last name, right? Sometimes just because of who you are. And so I think for me though, it was, I had to make a personal decision because of the business and because of the nature of the business. And I'm thankful to God for that wisdom, that I it wasn't going to be I couldn't come every day and do it. And I tried it at first. I tried
Hmm.
it to give that 150%, but I knew that it wasn't going to last. You burn out really quick. And
Yeah.
so I'm thankful for that. And then the peace that I had was partly because of that, because I wasn't going crazy, but also because, it's the peace of God. And that my faith is, number one for me. And I believe that that is the only way that I'm able to get through, challenges that life presents. Especially, you got to have something, right?
Yeah.
In this business, Pauline, you have to have something. You got to have your faith. You got to have something you believe in. You got to have a vice. Some
Hmm.
people, go to the bottle. Some people, you know, go to
Go
all
to the
kinds of other
ganj.
illicit things,
Yeah.
right? That I don't need to go into. But, because of the constant pressure to be the
Yeah.
best. And people don't factor that in, which, because in normal businesses you want to be the best as well, but being on TV as well, such
You've got
a
eyes from
yeah,
outside perspectives too, right? So
exactly.
it's not only eyes within the newsroom that you're competing through, it's eyes outside. So you really are just scrutinized for every little wrong move.
Thank you.
Truly, truly.
Yep.
I think you brought up the other part that I was going to say, and the other thing that stood out to me was always your faith. That was the one thing that I remember when we drive with Toy. It was always worship music in the car, and I found God in Louisiana. I grew up Roman Catholic, but I didn't. I mean, I went to school for 4 years in a Catholic school, Roman Catholic school, but nothing would have stuck there truly. And I left the church after my dad died because we had an incident where they said that if it was a suicide, they were not going to give him a burial. And so thankfully for us, we had friends of the family who were funeral home directors, and we're just like, we don't know how he died, and so we were able to bury him. But it just left a really sour taste in my mouth. And my mom, she had a friend who took her to a Christian church, and it was Times Square Church in New York. And so I remember as she walked in, oh, it make me cry. We grew up, and my father always wanted to go to like a Black gospel church, and he'd never been to a Black gospel church. Okay. And here he was 6 months after my dad died. And my mom walks into Times Square Church, and they have this beautiful Black choir that starts singing. And so she's like, he sent me here, right? Like, it was just such a beautiful moment. And so it'll get better, guys. I promise. We're not going to cry the whole time. But however, that was our first introduction to Christianity, I think. I'd gone to Times Square Church with her. Not that I was anything like, oh, I'm going to go to God and anything, nothing like that. I was living in California at the time. And here and there, when I'd have these moments, especially after my dad's death, my mom would just be like, just pray about it, right? And so I would talk to God very informally and just if you're up there and you're listening, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like I always got an answer. Somehow in my spirit, there was always an answer. And I remember moving from Redding, California, and I told my mom I was moving to Lafayette, Louisiana. And now I'm going to go back to my Polish immigrant roots, because a lot of Polish immigrants, when they say, they can't tell you a lot of the states in the United States, right? They think that Pennsylvania is upstate New York. And this is a real thing. If you grew up in New York City, we're going upstate to Pennsylvania. No, you're just going to Pennsylvania. It's a separate state. But so when I tell her Lafayette, Louisiana, and she goes, oh my God, Paulina. She goes, that's where Pastor Paulina is. And I was like, who is Pastor Paulina? Right. And as on top of that, I was like, you can't tell me where Pennsylvania is on the map, but you can tell me where Lafayette, Louisiana is? Like a thimble, what? And she was right. Pastor Dolina, I should say, was at Times Square, not at Times Square Church, at Our Savior's Church in Lafayette, Louisiana, where I started going to. I didn't want to keep drowning outside of news I didn't want to drown in my vices. And there was a lot of things that kept starting to come up for me as we were working in Louisiana. Not only are people in Louisiana very nosy and always want to know your business, I love you, but you're like Polish people. We're so fucking nosy. But everybody would just be like, where's your mom? Where's your dad? And in California, nobody asked you those questions, right? So it was easy to just kind of go under the radar, and nobody had to know your story. But all of a sudden, 5 years later, everybody's asking me about my story. And I'm like, oh my God. And so that, coupled with some stuff behind the scenes in news, I ended up at Our Savior's Church and going to go see Pastor Paulina, as my mom called him. And I'd sit in the back, I'd sit in the back like this, right? Be like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. But I would always apply what Pastor Paulina would say somehow, and it would somehow work. And it would somehow just make the day better. It would make life in the newsroom easier for some odd reason, And so I started to lean on that. But you were the first person in the newsroom for me who ever displayed a faith in God that was loud. Wow. And that was proud. So that was my very roundabout way of first crying and then getting here.
Well, thank God. That makes me feel good. I didn't know that, Paulina. So I'm glad to hear that. I was brought up in the church, obviously all my life, and taught to believe in God, to believe in a higher power, to pray, and to read the Word of God. And for me, it did become, of course, it was a requirement, of course, as a child. But eventually I gained my own relationship with God. And honestly, if I didn't have that relationship, I don't think I would have made it through, everything that we went through. And Paulina, what how difficult it was. And we all had our own situations and our own things happen to us while we were there in Lafayette. It was just a challenging, a challenging time. But a part of, why I was in Lafayette was because I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to be very far away from home. New Orleans itself, home, being around friends, family, familiarity
Yeah.
fed me. And on top of that, I was able to go to my church. So Lafayette, for those who are listening or watching and uh, don't know, are not familiar with the landscape, Lafayette is 2 hours west of New Orleans. And in fact, where I went next after I left Lafayette was Mobile, Alabama. That was 2 hours east of New Orleans. So I was trying to stay as close as I could because I knew what it did for me. And because of that, which is why you probably never hung out with me, Paulina, is because I was home every weekend.
Every
Um,
weekend you were home. Every weekend. That's true because we would
absolutely.
invite you and you would never go out because you were always home in New Orleans for the weekend.
I had to come back. I needed it to feed me. And I knew also I had to come to church because I needed to hear God's word. I needed to be uplifted. I needed to hear the choir sing. You know what I'm saying? I needed to just be around what was nourishing and nurturing to my spirit and my soul. And it would prepare me, like you said, with your time at church, it would prepare me for what I faced during the week there. And I'm thankful for, you all, or, my coworkers. I just feel like, we find friends. I feel like I picked up a friend that I carry with me in life at every station, every stop that I've gone to, because we're going through it together. Very similar situations.
Louisiana was so interesting to me because, like you said, it came with a lot of challenges, but it also came with, I pick on people that it's such a nosy state, but I also loved that part of it because it really did remind me of home, right? Like it reminded me of my Polish culture and Cajun and like Creole culture down south. It's very similar to our Polish culture, right? Like even the food is similar, from the cabbage that we'd make to just like the fried foods that we have, to the sauces and the gravy, the spices, like all of that is very similar. You guys are more spicy than we are, but very much the same kind of trajectory. And so I found that I loved it, right? Like I felt right at home. And then I'd hang out with Charlie and her family who would just open, I had every holiday with Charlie's family, right? And that was actually something that Joe Sam once said to me. He's like, "Don't you feel weird being the only white person at a black people's cookout?" And I was like, "No, why would I?" I was invited.
Joe, Sam, that
Has
is
no filter.
awesome. Love, that's my boy, but that sounds like something he would absolutely say.
Miss Paulina, you're not. I was like, "No, why would I be? I have my dog came from Charlie's family. Like she had
Oh
puppies,
yeah.
like right, like Gypsy had every." So I was like, "No, no." I was like, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter's, anything that I
Wow.
had, like they were my family away from family. Shirley was the first one. I was like, "Paulina, can we stop with the clip-ins? I'm just gonna do a weave on you." So remember, like I came in with like my long hair. Yeah. Oh
What? I
yeah.
didn't know.
Uh-huh.
I didn't. You see, and that is, not to throw you, but that's the thing that, I know you came from New York, Paulina, but you know, I was so, and we may get into it in a few minutes, but I lived in Connecticut was my last stop in the news business, and I just moved back a couple months ago, several months ago now, but from Connecticut. But the that kind of thing that Charlize's family did for you is something that I know I would have gotten in the South if I didn't have family in the South. When I was in Birmingham for those 3 years, the community just embraced me to just in a way that I had never been embraced in a community that I lived in before. And then when I leaving there to go to, and having lived in the South all my life, to go to Connecticut, which is different than New York, by the way,
Very different.
but similar in some ways, in the Northeast, I was devastated by the way, and people didn't treat me bad. They were not friendly. they weren't Southern.
Yeah.
Like they weren't yeah, they don't invite you, over when they know you're alone often. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it wasn't necessarily second nature to them. And that was really a struggle for me. But yeah, I mean, Charlie Jacobs, love Charlie. So I just love to hear that you had that experience, and I had no idea. I was at home. I was
Right.
back here in New Orleans at home, so I didn't know half of what was going
And
on
I think that's the thing, right?
for
Like,
hours.
yeah, but listen, everybody had somebody, right? Like that was the thing. You either had
Yeah.
like people. Most of the people that we had that were working there either had a spouse that they would, celebrate with, or they had family nearby, even if they weren't living in Lafayette, but they could hop on a
Right.
plane that was much quicker. Getting to New York from Lafayette was a trip. That was like a hassle. This like we have one airport, then it's like the layovers and this and like so it's not a direct flight. It's not easy to just be like, okay, mom, I'm gonna drive down 3 hours and see you. It was definitely challenging. And then, like I said, when you mix that in with just some of the own emotional, baggage that I was carrying that I'd never even unpacked from my dad's suicide, it was just like, holy guacamole, you're really like you're navigating a lot of this on your own. And you're navigating the stories that you're hearing in the newsroom, right? Like that was tough. Somebody once said to me when I moved from California to Louisiana, they didn't realize like I didn't go to school for news, right? Like I was never going to be a journalist. This was not something that I was taught. Like I learned on the job. And I think a lot of people were like, well, you knew what you were getting into. No, I don't. I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't realize that I would be walking into houses with people after they lost their loved ones, right? Or like I would be there as somebody just lost their wife or their son, and I'm the first person there, and they're just like, can I hug you? And you're like, yes, and I'm here to do a job, so now they're not going to like you so much. And yeah, like there's so many factors that I didn't kind of put together until the job actually kind of hits you in the face, and then you're like, oh, this is so much heavier than I expected.
Yeah, I mean, and I did go to school for journalism. I did go to
Mhm.
school for this, but I didn't learn. They didn't teach me to be prepared for this, the emotional side of it. And it almost feels like, I was talking to a friend a couple of weeks ago. Something happened while he was in the newsroom, and he had previously done sports. He was just moving over to news, and he'd asked, how do you separate yourself from these things? And I told him, look, you have to train yourself to leave it there. You got to leave it at work because it will drag you down. But I can recall so many times. I often tell my students, and I told probably all my classes about this story that I did when I was in Mobile. And I've done stories with people who lost loved ones and so on and so forth. I've done stories with men who've lost their wives, women who've lost their husbands the day after. Um, but the one that's really poignant is a woman. She's an elderly woman. She was homeless at the time, um, and living in a women's shelter. And she had a car, but she went to that morning she'd gone to McDonald's, I think, to get like a coffee and maybe a sandwich or something. And as she was getting in her car, another man who was likely homeless, mentally ill, jumped in and raped her. And my my executive producer in Mobile was an interesting character. And people don't understand too, you know, when you're empathetic, it is kind of difficult to do this job because you're being forced to sort of be someone like a stone wall. So my executive producer told me, hey, this story happened. We've heard of it from the police department. Now I need you to go find this woman. I'm like, how am I supposed to find her? She's homeless. What am I supposed to do here? He then goes and he looked up her name and like her latest address. He found that she was staying at the women's shelter. Now I'm a male, and luckily I had a videographer that night, but he was also a male. And so I was like, I don't feel comfortable doing this. And I don't think she would feel comfortable after just being raped to speak and sit with a man. And so I followed the rules. I knocked on the door of the women's shelter. They actually let me in, and she agreed to speak with me. She
Wow.
just didn't want her face on
Face.
camera. So they showed our shoes the whole time. So I'm sitting nearly knee to knee, Paulina, with this woman who less than 24 hours ago, or yeah, maybe a little over 24 hours ago, was raped by a man. And her voice was shaky.
Mm.
She was terrified. Her hands and feet were shaking the entire time as she was telling me the story. That emotion, the emotion, and you know, I know you know this. You don't want to say the wrong thing. It's just like, and for your viewers, imagine how difficult it is when someone loses a loved one. You just don't know what to say. Imagine dealing with that often
24/7.
with people who you don't even know. You never know what to say. You never want to say the wrong thing. And um, that is emotionally draining. It's almost like, if we are a battery, it's like taking more than half of the battery. It takes energy. It takes your energy. It takes a lot out of you to be able to do that. Then you got to go back and hurry up and put a story together and report it. And then go home and perhaps deal with whatever issues you might have on your own.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem. Like there's not enough support system in the newsroom, frankly, in and out of the newsroom, for mental health services or kind of these emotional stories that we go through. We're just kind of left to our own devices, right? And they're like, okay, now's the next day. Like you said, that 24-hour news cycle. It's great and it's bad at the same time, because tomorrow you may wake up and you may have the happiest story, but your heart probably and your emotional state is probably still with that woman, right? And so you haven't naturally recovered from that yet. You're trying to put on a brave face. Like you said, you probably got something going on at home, because let's be real, we're still people at the end of the day, and we all have something going on at home, whether you're dealing still with, unhealed trauma from a suicide like I was, or your own, or a breakup, or even just being alone in a city. Like, I think people don't really understand how isolating this industry is. Like, we are sitting in new cities every 2 years. We are starting over. It's tough. That in itself is tough. And then to try and understand the city, get to speak like the city, to know the culture of the city. So
And
like
not
all
making any money.
um
Don't get me started. So.
we can go there too. Yeah. I mean, we can go there now. I was making what, $28,000 a year when it was like reporting in Louisiana, Lafayette.
Yep.
So
Same.
yeah.
How? I don't even know how I survive. I mean, how do you survive off of that? I was like, it was only God and my parents. I'm so thankful for Keith and Jacqueline Thornton, because there's no way I could possibly. I mean, that's not livable. You all know. I mean, and now it's way worse. Obviously
I
with.
picked up a second
with
job to be able to continue on being a news reporter.
yep, yep. That's it.
And a lot of us had second jobs. A lot of us
Hmm.
had something that we were doing on the side. Joe Sam had a second job. I had a
Yep.
second job. I mean, some of us were thrifting clothes. Some of us were actually out there in
Definitely
the
thrifting
community. Like,
clothes.
we were doing something, like, I mean, Charlie would take me. She's like, all right, come on, I'll show you how to shop at Goodwill, right? Like, and it was great. I get like designer dresses all at
Yeah.
Goodwill. And so you really learned how to stretch your dollar, but it's still expensive, and it still very
Yeah,
much took
I
a
got into a
toll
lot
on,
of debt because
yeah.
of those moves. Not making any money, then having to move in a
Hmm.
couple of years. And when the check runs out, the check runs out. You know what I'm saying? But you still have to eat, you still have to show up, you know, haircut, hair done for you all, makeup,
Hmm.
right? Dress
Full beat
nice. Luckily I had a lot of dress clothes because we dressed up at my church.
for church.
So I already had a lot of dress clothes, thankfully, but I had to go to the thrift store as well to try to make it happen. And it all of that is emotionally and physically draining and mentally draining, because you go to work, you want to be happy, you got this great thing, but then when you go home, you got to deal with that. You still have your own issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting to kind of get this perspective because like you said, we sat next to each other for almost 3 years in that newsroom. And so much of this was never on the radar for us to talk about, like we knew the struggles that we were all individually facing in the newsroom and kind of the goals that we had. And I think that was like my goal. I had like such blinders on, right? Like I wanted to get away from all my problems in New York and my dad's suicide. And I was like, I'm going to focus on being a career woman. And I wasn't into dating really. I was like, I had my own little trysts and that was it. But I was like, we're done after that. Like, it was work, 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 work. And if you came between me and my work, you're out. Like that was it, right? Like there was just nothing that came in between it. And ultimately my goal was in 5 years, I wanted to be in a top 10 market, right? Like that did not happen. I did move up really, well. I went from Lafayette to Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. So the jump was really great. Ended up in a really bad marriage. And that took me back another couple of years, it feels like. And then Las Vegas came calling, after I left the industry. And they were like, would you consider coming back and telling stories that, I started the mental health podcast. And they said, would you consider doing that here? Like everybody else in the newsroom who goes through a lot of changes, the people that hired me all got fired in one day. And all the plans that we had went out the window. And that is how the cookie crumbles in news, right? Like the things that they tell you don't come to fruition. The promises that you're made sometimes are just that, just empty promises. And you go out there on a hope and a dream that things will work out and they don't. And so for me, I think where I was in Louisiana, I was so hungry, Toy, and I just wanted to I wanted to get there to that top 5, top 10 market, right? By the time I got here and I was in my 30s, I was like, that's too dangerous. I love MMJing, but even that is too dangerous. There's no reason why we should be sending a female to go do door knocks at 8 o'clock at night in the same neighborhood where a man just got shot to death for doing a door knock. Like, what is our problem? That is not even something that we should be considering sending somebody to, let alone a female by herself with a camera. Like, it's just, there was no rhyme or reason. And so I started to get more vocal about safety, and I started to get more vocal about or even just the way we started to tell stories here, where we would just slightly be like, well, it's okay if they didn't say that, but that was implied. No, they didn't say it. It's not coming out of my mouth. Like integrity, integrity, integrity. And I feel like at some point, the more of my integrity that kept getting chipped away, the more I was like, God, you got to get me out of here. You got to get me out of here. And I'll tell you this, Toy, I didn't step foot into a church for 8 years after I left Louisiana because I had my own issues with the church after that. But I stepped foot into Church LV here, and I went with my friend Vanessa, who was a producer, who was another one that was very loud about her faith, and it was beautiful to see. And finally, after almost a year of working with her, I said, can I go to church with you? And I did, and I went that Sunday, and I prayed. I was like, God, you need to move. You need to move, and you need to move, and you need to move in a way that I know it came from you. I walked in on Wednesday, and I was walked out 12 minutes later. They said, you are no longer welcome here. We are done. I was like, Jesus, thank you. And then that's it. That was it. They said I was not performing my duties the way they wanted me to. They disregarded the entire issue that we had about safety and sending females out to just breaking news situations. We had a school shooting out here, and a lot of us were stranded by ourselves at the school shooting. We had no contact with management. We got cut off from all kinds of communication, and nobody knew where we were. It's like, that is not acceptable. That is not acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. If I am on the clock, I am your responsibility. You should know what we're doing. You should know where we are. That shouldn't even be a thing like, we didn't know where. What do you mean you didn't know where I was? You sent me there. You sent me there. And so we made a concern, myself and a couple of people. I got kicked out. Those people ended up getting my job, and that's where the cookie went. And I'm like, you know what? It worked out. It worked out exactly the way it needed to, because I think I would have kept holding on to this dream that just kept depleting me and kept chipping away at my sanity, kept chipping away at my moral integrity. And I won't tell a story differently. If they didn't say it, I won't say it. If it's not how it happened, I won't say it happened that way.
Yeah, first of all, I'm proud of you and just glad you stood up for yourself, because I I became, I don't know, I was emboldened after Lafayette, when it came to standing up for myself, my beliefs, what I would
Yeah.
and would not do. And I'm gonna talk about God moving you in a second. But one thing that I really um I learned that if you didn't stand up for yourself in this business, there was nobody who was going to do it for you.
Hmm.
And that sounds so cliche, but no, it's real. Because it is almost, and I'm I still love the news business, but there are some very gross pieces of the business that it's that where there is such an insatiable appetite for um for information and for gets, that some people would be willing to put, as they were with you,
Hmm.
your safety in jeopardy to get the story. So let me just tell you this. After
Hmm.
midway through Mobile, I stopped knocking on doors. And I told
Yeah.
my managers, I'm not doing it. Just not happening. And I had to get to that point. First of all, it took a lot of faith to get to that point because I couldn't lose my job. I really couldn't. But I knew that my safety, and I was working night side, and Mobile was listed as one of the most dangerous cities in the US at one point. We had a first 48 in Mobile. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be driving around here where crime just happened or where a suspect might be for a crime and knocking on their doors. That is not wisdom. And I'm not going to do that. I won't be putting myself in danger. At one point, me and one of my photographers, we would just drive up near the house, sit there for about 10 minutes, then call my EP back. Hey, we knocked on the door, nobody answered. We found a way around it. But then after that, I was just like, no, I'm just not doing it. I won't be, I can't, and sometimes, when you're in situations like that, and I've been in situations like that before, Paulina, God just has to move you, you know,
Hmm.
I feel like in that situation, that was all God. He just moved you out of there. And I haven't been. I was fired before, not from a news job. I was fired from the job I got before Lafayette in between news because I think it was my destiny to go to Lafayette, and that was the only way I was getting there. But my last job in Connecticut, which is when I decided I'm done with news. I wasn't fired. I absolutely made the decision to leave. I was actually begged to stay by multiple people, but I, you know, and I don't want to go into too much detail about what happened, but um I was dealing with some issues, some racism issues. And of course, I was unhappy. I was uncomfortable. I was miserable. I was lonely. I was sad. I was destitute. I really was. Making more money than I've ever made. Finally got up to six figures. You know how it is in this business. And I'm thinking this is going to be my dream job. And then I'm dealing with racism from another employee. And I couldn't find community in Connecticut. I couldn't find community at the station because I was the only one who looked like me there on air. And in my shift, I was the only black male on air at the station. Not that no one else would have understood me, but um, it still felt lonely. And there was one guy I think that I was talking to about it who would kind of encourage me. He was an engineer, and then he gets fired. So I'm like, oh gosh, I literally have nobody here. I have nobody. And eventually, I went through the proper channels and stated my claims and filed, put in reports and let's just say that person was removed and then my job thought that I was going to change my mind at that point and still stay. And I'm like, no, well, the way you all handled this, before, because I had to go through several layers, several tiers to actually make something happen after reporting it so many times and reporting the issue so many times. So again, these are all things that we go through in this business, outside of trying to cover these stories every day. You still got to show up. You still got to be your best self on air. You still got to look good. You still have to please people. You still got to seem happy on the happy stories. You still got to seem sad on the sad stories. You have to convey the emotion that you can. And because of that, it drains you. And again, at some point, I felt that, God, there's got to be something better out there for me. And ironically, I started working on my PhD in 2021. I was in Birmingham, one of the best. That was the best market I've ever been in. And I was not even out in the field reporting. I was anchoring and doing traffic in Birmingham. So I was so happy because, that was super easy. And it was during the pandemic because I was so alone and, I started kind of making friends in Birmingham, but things were still essentially shut down. And so I said, well, let me just do it. I got my master's already. Let me just try the PhD. I was like, well, I don't plan on getting on the news business now, but eventually someday I will get out and I'll be able to fall back on this. And the timing couldn't be have been better. Last year in September, my birthday's in September. September, when I was on a birthday trip, I spoke to my agent and she was like,
Mhm.
"Hey, if you're planning to leave, we need a date." And I chose the date December 1st. I didn't realize, and if anybody's in dissertation mode and research mode, your dissertation is based on you and how quickly you work. And so it was waiting on me. I didn't realize that I would finish and defend my dissertation on November 20th. And then a week later, on December 1st, I was leaving. It was my last day. I was making my speech. And so I'd announced it, I think maybe uh was it November 20th? I think it was, yeah, it was right before Thanksgiving. And I made, this post, and some of my coworkers eventually saw it. They were like, "Oh my gosh." And then a week later, I announced, well, I'm leaving on Sunday. Sunday will be my last newscast that I'm doing. And so again, essentially, I didn't mean for things to align so well, but I mean, that was the way God had it. And I had no idea in 2021 when I was at another station in a whole nother market, much younger than I am now. Right? I had no idea at that time that the stars would align and that was just the right timing for me. So, God works in mysterious ways, and I'm just always following His leading. I'm at Dillard University now, my alma mater. I am a professor of mass communication, but I'm also the program coordinator over mass communication and film. I lead both programs here. I had no idea I would come here and do this and be an educator. So now I'm here trying to revitalize the program and teaching future journalists. And you were talking about the ethics and you would what you would say and that you would only tell the truth and you wouldn't allow yourself to be moved. And I'm teaching my kids that this week. I was just teaching them that about having ethics in journalism, right? And treating people fairly and respectfully and being objective. So who would have known that my life would come full circle like this within a matter of 11 years, So this is where I am now.
Listen, I think it's always a God move. And I'll tell you this, the year before I got fired, I had already talked to this management and I said, I would like to get out of my contract. And like you, they would not let me get out of my contract. And they're like, no, we're going to hold you to it, hold you to it, hold you to it. In December of 2023, I ended up just purchasing an LLC, which was a month literally right before I got fired. And I already had something in mind, and I was like, I'm just going to quit in May. And a girlfriend of mine, Gina, was like, don't, because she's like, whatever you do, don't quit. She goes, that'll be bad. She's like, or get yourself fired. And then but I didn't have to work too hard to get fired. God literally just got me fired overnight. And so I had already had the LLC. I had already had the plans in motion. And I think I was just so afraid to step out on my own and to kind of see what this would, you know, how this would unfold. And I think I'm still figuring out how this will unfold, right? Like, I think it's been now over a year and a half that I've been a business owner. I love what I do. I don't know that I'm as fulfilled as I was in news. I think I'm missing that, like, I liked helping people. I didn't necessarily like being on TV, but I liked helping people. I liked telling their stories. And I was always very appreciative of the fact that I have this gift. I have the means or the ability to be on TV. Somebody saw me to do that, and they gave me the opportunity, and I'm entrusted with somebody else's story. And so I have to do it well. And I miss that part, right? Like that's the part I miss. Now I do social media, TikToks, and all that great stuff, and it's fun and it's lighthearted, but you miss that part of it. So, but the other thing that I feel like towards the end of my career, I didn't feel like we were helping anymore. I felt like all we were doing was just regurgitating the same story back to back to back, and it didn't help anybody. And it was just kind of like, all right, I'm literally mentally exhausted from this story. I'm on my, I don't know, 30th story this month on domestic violence. Like there's not much more I can do here. There's not much, like I'm exhausted from these stories. The public's exhausted, and we're not really helping people, and there's no resources and there's nothing. So God has been moving. God has been moving. He got me back to church first, gave me a business, and I've been stewarding that. But this past February, I want to say, I thought I heard the Holy Spirit say, "You're going to be going to school." And I was like, "School? What? Why?" Right? And I heard it in my spirit very loud. "You're going to be going to school of ministry." And I was like, "Me, school of ministry." I was like, "God, you funny." And so I went online and I checked the school of ministry at my church. They didn't have it for my age. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I heard wrong. I heard wrong." A month later, okay, my pastor is up there and he announces, he goes, "We have now opened up the school of ministry for all ages." I was like, okay. So now I'm
Wow.
officially in school of ministry for the last month and a half. And when people are like, "Why are you in it?" I don't know, but I know that I've had my own journey with God. I've had my own, um, kind of. I have enough church hurt to go around that I'm still healing. I have enough of my own trauma that God has kind of woven together and has helped heal some parts and is still working on other parts. But I think when I go back to it, what I'm missing, what I was always missing in church was kind of the theology behind it. And so, me being an English major and a history buff, I love that kind of stuff. And so, School of Ministry is doing that. I get to kind of piece together the history of it and the Bible and understand it and kind of get to sit there and, ruminate in it and be like, "Oh, this is so cool. Like, I didn't know that this connected with this and this with this." And so, it's been a journey. It's been a journey, and that's where we're at. So I've got 8 more months left. We're cooking
Wow. Well,
something.
congratulations, first of all. That's amazing.
Thank you.
And I just tell you, it that is what's so wonderful about God is, Paulina, I feel like I've lived so many different lifetimes, even though I'm only 33. I feel like I've lived so many. That's the thing about working in news. It just feels like you've lived so many different things and ways and lived in so many different areas. And to go back to what you were saying about your departure, I think that's why I was making all these gestures when you said it. I feel the same way about
Mhm.
part of why I left. I didn't feel like I was helping anymore. I would tell people that often, that the way that this makes sense, the way that this feels, I'm okay with doing some of the things that feels a bit um, exploitive, you know, or some of the things that feel like, that almost make me seem like I don't care about people as much, is
Right.
that I know at the end of the day, I'm helping somebody. And when it doesn't feel like that anymore, and that's how I felt when I was in Connecticut. I don't know if it was the way I was telling stories because I was doing mornings. I was anchoring 2 mornings on the weekends and then reporting 3 during the week. I just didn't feel like I was helping anybody anymore. I didn't feel like my stories mattered or made any difference in anyone's life anymore. And so, I'm just thankful that, the God's will was for me to be back and that the timing all matched up. And I was thinking about the scripture when you were talking. It's 1 Corinthians 13 and 12, if you don't mind me. It
Yeah.
says, "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity." Why am I reading this without my glasses, which are right in my hand? "All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely." So essentially, it's just saying that we see things. as puzzle our lives, things like getting into the school of ministry and God sending you to this school of ministry for whatever reason. You have no idea what it's about, but God sees it, the full puzzle. And eventually, you will see why you went there. You will see, I see now why I got my PhD at the time that I did. Eventually you will be able to see. And, there's a little old black church hymn where, and I think they sing it in the white church too.
Hmm.
Will understand it better by and by. You know what I'm saying? And people sing it at funerals, but I think that is just how God is. And I feel like so many things that I've gone through in my short time in news. I guess, I mean, I always, it's a decade in news, but, I still feel like that's a short time considering, other people's tenure in news that I understand now. Some things I still don't understand, but other things I do understand now why I had to go through what I went through. And if I was able to impact at least one person's life, I believe I did my job. If I was able to leave at least the mark on at least one person, I believe I did my job and the job that God sent me there to do. Don't know what it is, still don't know. I still see things in a puzzling way, as the scripture says, or in King James version of that, it says, now we see things through a glass darkly. Darkly. I can't see through the glass. But I believe that it was purposeful. And when purpose leaves, I'm out the door as well. So that's why I, had to leave, my situation. So
That's the thing. Like when we talk about purpose, right? I think that God's made a provision for me this last year until everything lined up the way that it did. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not fulfilled what I'm doing yet, but I know that there is a purpose for everything. And I do know that I feel more fulfilled when I'm in that church. I feel more fulfilled when I'm getting the Holy Spirit and I'm listening and I'm understanding. I also am so shocked by this revival of young kids in my church. It's a very multidimensional and multicultural church that I go to, led by Pastor Benny Perez. But the kids, I mean, they're like 18, 19, 16. Like even the kids in my school of ministry, they're kids. And I'm like, they're on fire for God. And that is something that I don't know that I've seen, or something that like I said, I went to a Catholic school, right? I grew up Catholic. We very much know the sacraments. We go through that, but it's very scripted. Stand up, sit down, kneel, sing the hymns, go up, get your Eucharist, and that's it. And that was it. I don't even know if I understood what the priest was saying half the time when he was reading out of the Bible. But now that I sit in the Word, it's a very different experience. And so I'm thankful for my journey. Still excited to see kind of what happens next. And like you, I don't know that there's ever been a job that I had that was wasted. I think God had made a plan for everything. I remember when I worked at my mom's hair salon and I was doing hair and makeup, and I was like, what am I ever going to use this for? Well, let me tell you, in news, we don't have a hair or makeup budget, okay? So like, God, thank you for giving me this skill that I was able to later help other women in my industry be like, okay, this is what you can do on makeup. This is what you could do with hair. And like helping them in those kind of ways that I had no clue that this is where that would come in handy. I had to learn how to, make myself presentable. But like, man, that really came with so much preparation. The fact that I used to waitress or bartend, like you had to be fast at doing things and multitasking. That's all we do in news. We're always multitasking. We're always having to have our head on a swivel. Like, what did you say? This one's ready. That one's ready. Like you're running around. Whatever this next chapter is, I know that it's going to be whatever my news journey did for me, it laid down the foundation for whatever this next chapter is, whatever that may look like. I love the news industry and I hate it all at the same time, right? Like I see the pros and the cons of it. I wish that more people in school were taught what it's really like to be in news and kind of what the industry looks like versus kind of giving these cookie cutter ideas of what news feels like. But ultimately, I think it's it's a good industry if you're okay with being tossed around a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean a lot of it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and I try to be as real with my students. I teach here at Dillard. I also teach at Purdue University Global, and I've just stopped teaching. I taught the summer semester at Loyola University of New Orleans, And I always, I try to be very clear with my students as to how this business works and in getting into news. And there are so many more avenues now, like the one
Yeah.
you're doing right now with your podcast. Um, and being an influencer and social media, there's so many different avenues that
Right.
we can take these days, which is a good thing, which is a blessing.
Mhm.
And a lot of I'm finding that a lot of them are not even interested in taking a traditional avenue, and I'm not even mad at that, honestly. I'm not so mad at it because when you look at the business, Paulina, there's such a mass exodus right now,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you see it with your peers. I see it with my peers. I'm thinking about like our station at Lafayette. There are not very many people that were there with us who are still on TV. In fact, I can't think of one except for, let me see, Jay Russell, who is back on TV after being off TV for a while. He got out of the business for quite some time. And he just got back on. But other than that, and there may be some that are still
And I
on, but
think
I
Taylor
keep,
Trichet.
who's that?
Taylor Trichet.
Taylor. Taylor,
But
yes. And she's
Taylor
still
is
on
now at
Lafayette.
another but she's at another station now too because of budget cuts, right? So again, we're seeing this all across the industry. It's either the
Yep.
exodus or, I think I got let go at the right time because honestly, just 2 weeks later, they let go of another 12 people after that, and first they were doing firings, then they were just doing mass exoduses of people and just like, hi guys, we're doing budget cuts. And then the problem is that we were already doing the job of so many people, Toy. Like, I remember I was able to do the director's board at some point, the audio, like, we were literally doing everything. And so now that you get to like a market like Las Vegas or the top, top 30, top 10 markets, like, and you're still you're being told that, hey, we're going to keep pulling resources from you. You're like, I'm already doing the job of 4 or 5 people. How many more jobs can I do? How much more can I give? And the answer is the quality is suffering. People are going through burnout much quicker than they were before. We're not going to see this industry bounce back, I don't think, as quickly. So I'm glad that you're honest with your students and that they are looking at this as an avenue to a means for something else, because I used all
Yeah.
my skills in news and created this, right? This is all the same stuff we were doing in news, video editing, creating graphics.
hmm
So everything is
Yeah,
transferable.
I think that when I left my station in Connecticut and, it was an NBC O&O, which, let me be very clear. I'm not going to down talk NBC because NBC was a good company, considering especially a lot of the companies that we worked for. Um, you know, the companies that we worked for. But there was a mass exodus from my station after I left. I'm not saying I started the revolution or anything, but so I left. I was the weekend morning anchor. The two main morning anchors left shortly after I left. A couple of reporters left. Meteorologists left right before me. So it was a mass exodus. And I'm sure that everybody has their own story and reasoning as to why. Some people went to other stations. Some people got out. And the stories are not the same, but the business is also not the same. And as you said, I don't know if the business will bounce back neither. I still love news as you do. So I'm hoping that, you know, some things change, but you know, it's important to look out, and I'm sure so many people in other industries can relate. It is important to look out for the least of my little ones, as the Bible says, right?
Yeah.
The people who keep the machine running. And I think for me, all the sacrifices that you make in news, they weren't matching up with what you do get, the pay and
Right.
the benefits, and they just weren't coming together enough. Again, I try to be as honest as possible because I think it's going to take that, especially with we're older journalists now, Paulina.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't feel like it, we are some vets now, and
Yeah.
we have to be. And I feel like once a journalist, always. I'm never gonna say I'm no longer a journalist. I believe I'm a recovering news anchor, news reporter. But I am always going to be a journalist.
we are now the veterans and then the old journalists, but the journalist in you doesn't die, right? I think for me, it's just that title has kind of morphed a little bit into storyteller. But that's where I focus my time now.
And those skills will always be valuable. I'm finding that, you know, corporations pay tens of hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of dollars for storytellers. For what we do in about 3 or 4 hours, maybe
Hmm.
they will pay and pay dividends for and allow people weeks to do. And
Yeah.
so, for those former journalists or journalists who are looking to get out of the industry who may be listening, there is always somewhere for you to go. And it's not gonna be easy to do it, to pivot, but there is always a pivot out there that you can certainly take. I think you always got to be preparing, getting those skills right, getting a DSLR camera like you got, Paulina, um,
Yeah.
and the special fancy mic and so on and so forth. But your skills are always valuable, and I think News didn't do a good job with that, showing us how valuable our skills were because of how often and how good we had to be and how often we had to do and how quick we had to do it. Didn't realize, wait, you really got it.
Yeah.
I have three part-time jobs. I teach at Dillard full-time, and then of course Purdue part-time. I'm also a PR account manager for a local
Wow.
PR marketing company. And then I'm a communication consultant through another local company, which I'm using that to consult for a mayoral campaign. And the skills that I have,
Yeah.
I never would have thought that they would be useful, but it just goes to show you that, you can pivot if you need to.
I think, Toy, finally, just to round it out, and I know that, we talked about kind of our moves were pretty much God moves, right? Like it was just the way that things lined up. But I know that a lot of people do start making plans ahead. And I know that some people in the industry, even as I was transitioning out, they were like, oh my God, I've been applying for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. And we're hearing nothing back sometimes. So do you have any advice on that? Any kind of like maybe words of advice or wisdom on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you really have to, first of all, this is not new. It's not something that you are alone in because it's happening to people all over the country. It's happening to people in multiple industries, not just our industry. And it's happening to some of the most qualified people as well as the least qualified people. I think, first of all, faith is one of the most important things. You really have to trust God in this moment, and you have to pray and allow God to lead you as to what to do. And don't ignore the call. Well, like you or like me, when we felt led to do certain things because we never know where it's going to bring you or how valuable it's going to be. But, you know, trust me, you got to trust the process and just be prepared to take 6 months or where you may not be working, but just be always preparing. Stay always ahead of the game. Always be applying. Always trying to take on extra little jobs here and there or opportunities here and there. I have a professor who works with us here, and he somehow he was a news videographer. He's always got additional work that people are calling him
Yeah.
for. I'm talking about the NFL to, just small organizations in the city. And so you just have to, make sure that you are taking the opportunities, making the connections, networking where you want to stay. So if you know you want to go back home, start the networking now with companies back home. It's important, but it's most important, in my opinion, to know that you can pivot. Your skills are very valuable and they can be extremely useful and they can make you a lot of money. And again, I just continuously revert to prayer and staying before God on how to pivot, how to move. And even if you intend on staying in the business, you really need that to stay to excuse me, to have some sustenance in this business and to be able to stay mentally sane and physically and emotionally sane as well. So those are just the skills, but it's not the end of the day. News is always there if you want to go back, and if you want to leave out and say deuces or peace out, you can do so as well.
Oh man, Toy, this has been a great conversation with you. We haven't connected in years. You know, I've followed your career. We've been, like you said, we followed each other now on social media because the world took us on two separate coasts. But it was wonderful to sit down and really kind of reminisce about what Lafayette brought, the good that came out of it, the ups and the downs, but also where life has brought us now. It really is a great transition. And on that note, Toy, thank you so much. That's our episode for the Honey Pod. Thanks, guys. Until next week.
All right. Thanks.
A special thanks to our Hive sponsors, Madrala Law Firm, TrueCore Wellness, and Metamorphosis. Need real-time guidance beyond the mic? Head over to our Patreon. There you'll find Madrala Law Firm offering insider legal advice for journalists, creators, and entrepreneurs. And TrueCore Wellness, sharing mental health and body healing practices for the heart behind the hustle. Your support turns words into healing and stories into honey.